Everyone who grows up in the American Southwest knows the rules. You learn them before you learn how to drive. Always bring extra water, check your spare tire, and if you see something strange out in the sagebrush at night, you keep your eyes on the road and you don't stop. I knew the rules. I was born in Albuquerque and raised on stories of the desert. I thought I was smart enough to handle the isolation. I was wrong. It was late October of 2019. I was driving a beat-up 2004 Toyota Tacoma, making the long haul from a job site in Phoenix back home to Santa Fe. I'd been working construction for 3 weeks straight, and exhaustion was heavy in my bones. It was roughly 2 a.m. when I made the decision that nearly cost me my life. The I-40 was backed up due to a massive collision involving two semis near Gallup. The GPS on my phone showed a 2-hour delay. I didn't have 2 hours in me. I just wanted my bed. I zoomed out on the map and saw a thin gray line cutting through the reservation land to the north, a shortcut that would bypass the highway and dump me out near Cuba, New Mexico. It was a gravel road, unnamed on the app, but it looked straight enough. I took the exit. The first hour was fine. The gravel was packed tight and the moon was full, casting a pale, ghostly illumination over the mesas and scrubland. It was beautiful, in that desolate, haunting way the desert always is. But as I went deeper into the Badlands, the road deteriorated. The gravel turned to loose dirt, and ruts appeared that were deep enough to swallow a tire. I had to slow down to a crawl, maybe 10 miles per hour. The silence out there is absolute. When you turn off the radio, there's nothing. No crickets, no wind, just the sound of your own blood rushing in your ears and the crunch of tires on dry earth. About 20 miles into this shortcut, my headlights caught something standing on the side of the road. In the desert, you see coyotes, deer, sometimes elk, but this was just a man. He was standing by a rusted mile marker, his back to me, wearing a flannel shirt and jeans that looked 3 sizes too big. He didn't turn around as my light swept over him. He just stood there, facing the empty darkness of the canyon. My instinct was to speed up, but the road was too rough. As I rolled past him, I couldn't help but look in the rearview mirror. He hadn't moved. He was just a statue in the dust. A shiver went down my spine, a primal warning. Why is he out here? There's no car. There's no house for 40 miles. I tried to shake it off, turning up the heater to combat the sudden chill in the cab. 5 minutes later, the truck lurched violently. The steering wheel jerked to the left, and I heard the sickening sound of rim grinding against rock. I slammed the steering wheel in frustration. "No, no, no," I whispered. I hopped out, leaving the engine running and the headlights on. The front left tire was shredded. I must have hit a jagged rock buried in the dust. I cursed, grabbed the jack and the tire iron from behind the seat, and went to work. The silence was heavy now. It felt like a physical weight pressing against my eardrums. Every turn of the lug nut echoed like a gunshot in the canyon. Clink, clink. I had the tire off and was wrestling the spare into place when I heard it. "Hey!" It came from the darkness beyond the reach of my headlights. I froze, kneeling in the dirt. It was a man's voice, flat, monotone. I stood up slowly, gripping the heavy tire iron. "Who's there?" I called out. My voice cracked a little. "Hey!" the voice repeated. It sounded exactly the same. Same pitch, same duration. No inflection of a question, just the word. I squinted into the dark. "I have a flat. I don't have any money. If that's what you want, I'm just changing the tire." There was a pause. Then the sound of gravel shifting, footsteps, but the rhythm was wrong. It was too fast, then a drag, then too fast again. Crunch, crunch, drag. Crunch, crunch, drag. "Hey," the voice said again. Closer now, maybe 30 yards out. I pointed the tire iron like a weapon. "Stay back! I'm armed!" I lied. The footsteps stopped. Then a new voice spoke. It wasn't the flat male voice. It was a woman's voice, high-pitched, terrified, and screaming. "Please help me! Oh God, my leg! Please help me!" My stomach dropped. It sounded like a young woman in severe pain. "Is someone hurt?" I yelled, taking a step forward before my brain caught up with my legs. Wait. The scream. It had cut off abruptly, like a recording being stopped. And then it played again. "Please help me! Oh God, my leg! Please help me!" It was identical, the exact same waver in the word God, the same intake of breath before leg. Humans can't repeat a sentence like that with that digital precision. I backed up against the truck, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. "Show yourself!" From the edge of the light, a figure emerged. It was the man I had passed earlier, the flannel shirt, the baggy jeans. But now that he was closer, I saw what was wrong. He was moving on all fours. His arms and legs were bent at sickening, impossible angles, like a spider. He scurried forward into the halo of the headlights, his belly scraping the dirt. But his head was twisted upright, looking at me. The face was wrong. It was smooth, too smooth. It looked like wet clay that had been roughly molded into the shape of a human face, but the artist forgot the details. The eyes were just dark pits. The mouth was a simple slash in the skin. The slash opened, revealing no teeth, just a black void. That slash opened, revealing no teeth. "Please help me! Oh God, my leg! Please help me!" The woman's voice screamed from that impossible mouth. I dropped the tire iron. Panic, cold, and absolute flooded my system. I didn't finish putting the lug nuts on the spare. I had only hand-tightened 2 of them. I didn't care. I scrambled for the door handle. The thing on the ground saw me move. It didn't scream anymore. It let out a sound that I can only describe as a coyote yipping, but deepened to the bass of a lion's roar. It sprang.
The creature launched itself off the ground with terrifying power. It didn't move like a man or an animal. It moved like a spring uncoiling. I threw myself into the driver's seat and slammed the door shut just as a heavy thud shook the entire truck. The window glass beside my head didn't shatter, but it cracked, a spiderweb fracture blooming right where my ear had been a second ago. A pale, elongated hand slapped against the glass. The fingers were too long, possessing too many joints. They scratched at the window, making a sound like nails on a chalkboard, only wetter. I fumbled with the keys. My hands were shaking so violently I dropped them into the footwell. "Come on, come on!" I screamed at myself, diving down to grab them. Outside, the thing was shrieking. It wasn't using the woman's voice anymore. It was cycling through sounds. I heard the sound of a crying baby. I heard the sound of a semi-truck horn. I heard the sound of my own voice saying, "Who's there?" over and over again. I grabbed the keys and jammed them into the ignition. The engine sputtered. The truck rocked violently as the creature climbed onto the hood. I looked up through the windshield. He was crouching there, looking in at me. Its skin was grayish-white in the glow of the dashboard lights. Up close, I saw that the clothes it was wearing weren't clothes at all. The flannel pattern was part of its skin, a pigment discoloration trying to mimic the texture of fabric. It was a camouflage predator. It raised a fist, or a claw, and smashed it down on the windshield. The safety glass bowed inward, dusting the dashboard with glittering shards. The engine roared to life. I didn't wait to check the gear. I slammed it into drive and floored it. The rear wheels spun in the loose dirt, throwing up a cloud of dust, and then we caught traction. The truck lurched forward. The creature lost its balance, sliding off the hood and tumbling to the side. I didn't look back. I drove. But I had forgotten about the tire. I had only hand-tightened 2 lug nuts. As I hit 20 miles per hour, the front left wheel began to wobble violently. The steering wheel shook in my hands, threatening to break my wrists. Thump, 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 thump. I couldn't stop. I knew if I stopped, I was dead. I checked the rearview mirror. In the red glow of my taillights, I saw it. It was running behind me. It was running on 2 legs now, but with a loping, unnatural gait, its arms swinging low and dragging across the ground. It was fast. Impossibly fast. It was keeping pace with the truck, doing 30 miles per hour on a dirt road. Go, go, I begged the truck. I pushed it to 40. The wobbling became a violent shaking. I could hear the metal stud shearing off. If the wheel flew off, the axle would dig into the dirt, the truck would flip, and I would be trapped in a metal can with that thing outside. Suddenly, the creature disappeared from the mirror. I didn't feel relief. I felt dread. Where was it? Then came the sound. Scritch, scritch, scritch. It was coming from the roof. It had jumped. It was on top of the cab. I swerved hard to the left, aiming for a ditch, then hard to the right, trying to shake it off. The metal roof dented downward above my head. It was punching the roof. I could hear the steel groaning. It was trying to peel the top of the truck open like a can of sardines. I saw a cattle guard coming up ahead, a grid of metal bars across the road meant to stop livestock. I made a split-second decision. I accelerated. 50 miles per hour. The wheel felt like it was about to detach. Just as I hit the cattle guard, I slammed on the brakes. The truck skidded, the front suspension bottoming out with a horrific crunch. Inertia did the rest. The thing on the roof didn't have anything to hold on to. I saw a blur of gray and flannel fly over the windshield and tumble onto the cattle guard. Its limbs got tangled in the metal grates. I didn't wait to see if it was stuck. I stomped on the gas. The truck groaned, the front wheel grinding horribly, but it moved. I drove. I drove for 10 miles on 3 good tires and one that was hanging on by a thread. I didn't breathe until I saw the streetlights of Cuba, New Mexico. I pulled into a 24-hour gas station, effectively crashing the truck into the curb near the air pump. I fell out of the cab, hyperventilating. The attendant, an older Navajo man, came running out. "Son, you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost," he said. I couldn't speak. I just pointed at the truck. He looked at the vehicle. The front left wheel was missing 3 lug nuts, and the last 2 were bent almost 90 degrees. The rim was destroyed. The roof of the cab was caved in, with deep claw marks gouged into the metal, stripping the paint down to the bare steel. But it was what was stuck in the door handle that made the attendant back away. Caught in the gap of the passenger door handle was a piece of flesh. It was gray, leathery, and dry. It didn't bleed. The attendant looked at me, his face grave. He didn't ask what happened. He knew. He just walked back inside, locked the glass doors, and flipped the sign to closed. He gestured for me to come inside through the night window. I stayed in that gas station until the sun came up. I had the truck towed to a scrapyard. I never wanted to drive it again. I rented a car to get back to Santa Fe. I live in the city now. I don't go camping. I don't take road trips. And if I'm driving at night and I see someone standing on the side of the road, or if I hear a voice calling for help from the dark, I turn up the radio, I lock my doors, and I pray that my car doesn't break down. because I know what's out there. It knows my voice now.
There is a specific kind of hypnosis that happens when you drive through the Midwest. They call it corn blindness. It's when the landscape doesn't change for hours. It's just blue sky, black asphalt, and walls of green and gold rising up on either side of you. I was moving from Columbus, Ohio to a new job in Denver, cutting right through the heart of Nebraska. It was July, humid and sticky, the kind of heat that clings to your skin like plastic wrap. I had been on Interstate 80 for 6 hours when a massive storm front began to roll in from the west. The radio alerts were screaming about flash floods and hail the size of baseballs. Traffic came to a standstill. I wasn't going to sit in a parking lot on the highway for 5 hours, so I did what any impatient 25-year-old would do. I checked my phone for a detour. Google Maps offered a gray route, a series of county roads that zigzagged north and then west, bypassing the congestion. I took the exit. Within 20 minutes, the paved road turned to gravel. Within 30, the gravel turned to hard, packed dirt. I was deep in the grid now. The corn out here was different than the stuff near the highway. It was taller, unnaturally tall. The stalks must have been 8 or 9 feet high, creating a dense green tunnel that blocked out the horizon. The sun began to set, casting long, distorted shadows across the dirt track. The storm clouds turned the sky a bruised purple. That's when I saw the bus. It was an old yellow school bus, the kind from the 90s, setting sideways across the road about 100 yards ahead. It wasn't crashed, exactly. It just looked abandoned. There were no skid marks. It was just parked perpendicular to the road, blocking the way forward. I slowed my Honda Civic to a stop. "Hello?" I muttered to myself. The AC hummed. Outside, the wind was picking up, making the ocean of corn rustle. Shh. It sounded like a million people whispering at once. I didn't want to get out, but I had no room to turn around. The corn grew right up to the edge of the dirt track. I put the car in park, grabbed my flashlight, and stepped out. The humidity hit me instantly. The air smelled sweet, like rotting vegetation and ozone. I walked toward the bus, gravel crunching under my sneakers. "Is anyone there? Do you need help?" I shouted. My voice didn't echo. The corn absorbed the sound instantly. I reached the bus. The folding doors were pried open. I shined my light inside. It was empty, but it wasn't just empty of people. The seats were covered in a thick layer of dust. This bus hadn't moved in years. Yet, the tires were inflated. The yellow paint wasn't faded. It was a contradiction. I was about to turn back when I saw something on the driver's seat. It was a notebook, an old leather-bound ledger. I stepped up the stairs, the metal groaning under my weight, and grabbed it. I opened it. The pages were filled with frantic handwriting. No dates, just entries. "The rows are moving. They don't like the engine noise. We gave them Billy. They want more." A chill went through me that had nothing to do with the AC. I dropped the book. We gave them Billy. I turned to run back to my car. That's when I realized the landscape had changed. My car was still there, about 50 yards back, but the road behind the car was gone. Where there had been a dirt track leading back to civilization, there was now a solid wall of corn. The stalks were woven together, thick and impenetrable. The road I had just driven down didn't exist anymore. I was trapped in a pocket of dirt between a wall of corn and an abandoned bus. Panic is a funny thing. It makes you do irrational things. I ran to my car, jumped in, and locked the doors. I tried to reverse, thinking maybe I could ram through the stalks. I slammed on the gas, the car shot backward and hit the wall of corn. It felt like hitting a brick wall. The airbag didn't deploy, but my head snapped back against the headrest. The corn didn't break. The stalks were as hard as iron bars. I sat there, engine idling, staring at the green wall in my rearview mirror. Then, the whispering stopped. The wind died down. The rustling ceased. From the cornfield to my left, the only side I hadn't checked, a sound emerged. It was the sound of dry leaves dragging against dry leaves. Something was walking through the rows, something big, and it was whistling. A cheerful, out-of-tune melody. Pop goes the weasel. I killed the engine, I killed the lights, I slumped down in my seat, praying that the tint on my windows was dark enough. A figure emerged from the stalks. It looked like a scarecrow. It wore denim overalls and a plaid shirt stuffed with straw. A burlap sack was tied over its head, but it didn't move like a prop. It walked with a disjointed, jerky rhythm. It walked up to the middle of the dirt road and stopped. It slowly turned its head, the burlap sack twisting, toward my car. Then it raised a hand. The fingers were made of sharpened cornstalks. It pointed at me. And then from the dark field behind it, dozens more figures began to step out.
There were at least 20 of them. They emerged from the corn like lice crawling out of a head of hair. Some were small, child-sized effigies made of dried husks and twine. Others were towering, 7-foot monstrosities with rusted farm tools wired to their limbs. They didn't rush the car. They just stood there in the twilight, forming a semicircle, blocking the only path to the bus. I was hyperventilating. My phone had 0 bars. "Think, Elias, think," I whispered, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. The leader, the one in the overalls whistling "Pop Goes the Weasel," took a step toward my hood. He tapped on the metal. Clank. Clank. It wasn't a threat. It was a summons. Then he spoke. The voice was muffled by the burlap, dry and raspy, like sand rubbing against stone. "The harvest is late, and the soil is hungry." I didn't wait to hear the rest. I turned the key, the engine roared to life. I shifted into drive and floored it. I didn't aim for the road. I aimed for him. The car surged forward. The scarecrow didn't move. He didn't even flinch. Thud. The impact was solid. It felt like hitting a deer. His body flew up onto the hood, then rolled off to the side. But as he rolled, the burlap sack on his head tore open. I saw it for a split second in the headlights before I sped past. There was no straw underneath. There was meat. Red, raw muscle and bone, stripped of skin. He wasn't a scarecrow. He was a man who had been shucked. I swerved around the other figures. They snatched at the car, their cornstalk fingers scratching, screeching lines down the paint. I aimed the car at the gap between the bus and the cornfield on the right. It was narrow, maybe just wide enough for a sedan. I hit the gap at 40 miles per hour. The side mirrors were ripped off instantly by the bus on one side and the iron-hard corn on the other. Sparks flew. The metal screamed. But I popped through to the other side. I was back on the dirt track. "Yes!" I screamed. But the road didn't lead to freedom. It led deeper. The further I drove, the stranger the world became. The corn turned from green to a sickly pale white. The stalks began to lean over the road, forming a roof. I was driving through a tunnel of vegetation. And then the car died. No sputter, no warning lights. The electronics just fried. The dashboard went black. The headlights cut out. I was moving at 50 miles per hour in total darkness. I slammed on the brakes, skidding to a halt in the pitch black. Silence again. I fumbled for my flashlight, my hands trembling so hard I dropped it twice. I finally clicked it on. The beam cut through the darkness. I was in a clearing, a perfect circle of flattened dirt in the middle of the infinite field. In the center of the clearing was a hole in the ground, a pit. It was pulsing with a faint amber light from deep below. I knew, with an instinctual certainty, that I could not stay in the car. The car was a coffin. I grabbed the flashlight and my pocket knife, a pathetic weapon against this nightmare, and opened the door. As soon as my foot touched the dirt, the ground shook. From the pit, a voice boomed. It wasn't human. It was the sound of the earth grinding together. A seed is sown. The corn around the perimeter of the clearing began to violently thrash. The stalks were uprooting themselves. They were walking, thousands of them. The corn itself was alive. I looked for an exit. There was none, just the wall of white stalks closing in. Then I saw it, a drainage pipe, a concrete culvert, half buried in the dirt near the edge of the clearing, partially obscured by weeds. It was small, tight, but it led under the road. The scarecrows were entering the clearing now, stepping out between the walking stalks. The skinless man in the overalls was back. He was limping, his body broken from the car impact, but he was still coming. I bolted for the pipe. "Get him," the dry voice rasped. I dove into the concrete tube just as a hand made of barbed wire grabbed my ankle. It tore through my jeans and sliced into my calf. I screamed, kicking blindly. My heel connected with something soft, a face. The grip loosened. I scrambled deeper into the pipe. It was filled with muddy water, dead rats and spiders. I crawled on my elbows, dragging my bleeding leg. The pipe was claustrophobic, barely wider than my shoulders. I could hear them scuttling into the pipe behind me. I crawled until my lungs burned. The pipe seemed to go on forever. Suddenly, the texture under my hands changed. Concrete turned to grass. I fell out of the other end of the pipe and tumbled down a steep embankment. I landed in water, cold, flowing water. A creek. I looked up. I was under a bridge. Above me, I heard the beautiful rhythmic thump-thump of tires on asphalt. Interstate 80. I scrambled up the muddy bank, waving my arms like a maniac. A semi-truck blasted its horn and swerved, screeching to a halt on the shoulder. The driver, a burly guy with a beard, jumped out with a tire iron. "What the hell you doing, kid?" I collapsed on the asphalt. I pointed to the field below the bridge. "The corn," I wheezed. "The bus, they're shucked." The trucker looked down at the field. Then he looked at me. He didn't look confused. He looked terrified. He looked at miles of corn stretching out into the night. "Get in the truck," he said quietly. "Don't look back, just get in." He drove me to the next town, North Platte. He didn't ask any questions. He just kept checking his mirrors. When he dropped me off at a hospital, he gave me one piece of advice. "Stick to the interstate, son. The section lines don't belong to the United States. They belong to him who walks behind the rows." My leg healed, though I have a scar that looks like barbed wire wrapped around my calf. I live in Denver now. I like the mountains. You can see everything in the mountains. But sometimes, when I buy vegetables at the grocery store, I'll pick up an ear of corn. And if I hold it up to my ear, I swear I can hear screaming trapped inside the husk.
The Pacific Northwest is beautiful, but it has a way of swallowing people. I've been a landscape photographer for 10 years, specializing in remote captures. I hike into places where trails don't exist to get shots that nobody else has. I'm used to the rain, the mud, and the silence. But last November, deep in the Cascade foothills, I found a silence that felt artificial. I was tracking a specific ridgeline near Mount Rainier, looking for a hidden waterfall that I had spotted on some old satellite imagery. It was supposed to be a 3-day solo trek. By the afternoon of the second day, the weather turned. A heavy gray fog rolled in, the kind that sticks to your skin and muffles sound. Visibility dropped to maybe 20 feet. I checked my GPS. It was spinning. No satellite lock. That happens sometimes in deep valleys, so I wasn't panicked. I pulled out my physical compass. The needle was dancing, swinging wildly between north and west. That did make me nervous. I decided to set up camp early. I found a small clearing beneath a massive canopy of old-growth Douglas firs. As I was clearing away some ferns to pitch my tent, my boot hit something hard. It wasn't a rock. It sounded hollow, metallic. I scraped away the moss and dirt. It was a steel hatch. It was square, rusted shut, and welded into a concrete frame buried in the earth. It looked like some kind of Cold War remnant or an illegal prepper bunker. But what was strange was the wire. A thick black cable ran from the hatch, snaking across the forest floor and disappearing into the dense undergrowth. Against my better judgment, curiosity's a curse, I followed the cable. It led me about 50 yards away to a small wooden shack I hadn't seen through the fog. It was camouflaged perfectly, covered in moss and rotting leaves. I walked up to the shack. The door was hanging off its hinges. I shined my flashlight inside. It wasn't a cabin. It was a listening post. Inside, sitting on a rotting wooden table, was a massive rack of radio equipment. Old dials, vacuum tubes, headsets. It looked like 1970s tech. And it was humming. The equipment was on. In the middle of nowhere with no power lines, this 40-year-old machinery was warm to the touch. I stepped inside to get out of the drizzle. The air smelled of ozone and stale tobacco. I looked at the main receiver. The frequency needle was jumping rhythmically. Click, buzz. Click, buzz. Suddenly, the speaker crackled to life. I jumped, nearly dropping my flashlight. A voice came through the static. It was male, calm, and sounded like a professional broadcaster. Subject has entered the perimeter. Elevation, 4,200 feet. Heart rate, elevated. He is currently investigating the listening post. My blood ran cold. I looked around wildly. "Hello?" I shouted. "Who is this?" The radio crackled again. Subject is attempting communication. Vocal stress detected. He is looking at the receiver. I backed away, hitting the wall. This wasn't a live broadcast from a person watching me. The voice, it sounded synthesized, but the timing was instant. I grabbed my pack. "I'm leaving," I muttered to myself. "This is some sick prank." I turned to the door. The radio spoke again, louder this time. Advisory. Departure is not recommended. The sun has set. They are active. I looked out the broken door. The fog had darkened. Night had fallen while I was inside, much faster than it should have. And in the tree line, right at the edge of the clearing where the hatch was, I saw a light. It wasn't a flashlight. It was a pale green bioluminescent glow. It was floating about 7 feet off the ground. As I watched, another light appeared next to it. Then another. 3 lights, hovering, watching. I stepped back into the shack and kicked the door shut, propping a heavy rusted chair under the handle. The radio static cleared up instantly. The voice returned, but now it sounded different. Closer. "Do not open the door, Mark." It knew my name. I stared at the radio. "What are you?" I whispered. "I am the automated warning system for Sector 4. You have trespassed into a containment zone. The hatch you found must not be opened, and the things outside want to open it." "What things?" I asked, my hand gripping my hiking knife. "The locals. They mimic the forest. They mimic the light. And now they will try to mimic you." From the darkness outside, a sound erupted. It wasn't a roar. It was a camera shutter. Click. Whirr. My camera shutter. The sound of my specific Nikon model. Then from a different direction, the sound of my zipper opening. Zip. Then, right against the thin wooden wall of the shack, my own voice, "Hello? Who is this?" I backed into the center of the room, surrounded by the sounds of my own existence being played back to me from the deep woods. And then, the pounding started. The first blow shook the entire shack. Dust rained down from the rafters. Something heavy had slammed into the side of the structure. Thud. "They are testing the perimeter," the radio voice said. It sounded eerily calm, a stark contrast to the terror rising in my throat. "They cannot enter as long as the seal is intact, but they will try to lure you out." "I'm not going out there," I hissed, gripping my knife so hard my knuckles turned white. Outside, the sounds changed. The mimicking of my camera and voice stopped. A silence fell over the clearing, heavy and oppressive. Then, a new sound began. "Mark? Mark? Are you in there?" It was my mother's voice. My mother who lives in Florida. My mother who has never hiked a day in her life. "Mark, honey, I hurt my ankle. It's so dark out here. Please open the door." The mimicry was perfect. It had her inflection, her slight southern drawl. If I hadn't known for a fact she was 3,000 miles away, I would have torn that door down to help her. "It's a trick," I said aloud, mostly to convince myself. "Correct," the radio confirmed. "Audio synthesis based on your memory patterns. They are reading your neural pathways. Do not listen." "Reading my what? What is this place?" I yelled at the machine. "This is a disposal site for things that didn't work out, things the government made in the 50s, biological camouflage units. They were supposed to be spies. They became part of the ecosystem." The pounding returned, harder this time. Wood splintered near the window frame, a long gray limb, looking like a branch stripped of bark, but with too many joints, punched through the rotting wood. It groped blindly into the room. I scrabbled back, kicking the equipment table. The limb thrashed, knocking over a stack of old logbooks. At the end of the limb was not a hand, but a cluster of wet, twitching tendrils that looked like tree roots. "Fire," the radio commanded. "They fear heat." I didn't have a gun. I had a flare gun in my emergency kit. I fumbled with my pack, ripping the zipper open. The limb was extending further, sweeping the room, sensing the air. It was finding me. I loaded a red flare cartridge. My hands were shaking violently. The limb lashed out, wrapping around my ankle. It felt cold and slimy like a slug. It yanked. I screamed and fired the flare gun point blank into the cluster of roots. Whoosh! Magnesium burned white hot. The creature let out a shriek that sounded like metal grinding on metal. It retracted the limb instantly, thrashing outside. I heard the sound of wet bodies crashing through the brush, retreating. The shack was filling with smoke. The flare had ignited the dry, rotting wood of the wall. "You must move," the radio said. "The fire will attract the others. They will swarm to extinguish it. You have a window of opportunity. Run." "Run where?" I coughed, eyes watering. "Due east. Follow the cable back to the hatch. Past the hatch there is a ravine. Cross the river. They cannot cross running water. Their biology is unstable." I looked at the radio one last time. "Who are you really?" There was a pause, a burst of static. "I am the previous ranger. My body is in the hatch. My consciousness was archived. Go, now." The wall was fully engulfed in flames. I kicked the chair away and threw the door open. The heat of the fire had pushed the fog back. In the flickering orange light, I saw them. They were standing at the edge of the clearing. Tall, thin figures.
They looked like trees trying to be men. Their skin was bark-like, covered in moss. Their faces were smooth surfaces, like polished wood with no eyes or mouths. But as the firelight hit them, their surfaces rippled, trying to camouflage, flashing between textures: brick, leaf, skin, flannel. I sprinted. I didn't look at them. I ran toward the hatch. I tripped over the cable, scrambled up, and kept running. Behind me, I heard a sound like a stampede, not footsteps, but the sound of hundreds of branches snapping at once. They were coming. I reached the hatch. The metal was glowing faintly green now. They had been trying to open it. I vaulted over it and crashed through the undergrowth, sliding down a muddy embankment. "East, east, east," I chanted. I heard the rushing water before I saw it. The ravine was steep. I slid down the last 20 feet on my back, tearing my clothes on rocks and roots. I hit the freezing water of the river. The current was strong. It swept me off my feet immediately. I gasped, swallowing ice-cold water, flailing for a grip. I slammed into a boulder, grabbed a piece of driftwood, and hauled myself toward the other bank. I dragged myself onto the rocky shore, shivering, hypothermic, and exhausted. I looked back across the river. On the opposite bank, lining the ridge, were dozens of them. They stood perfectly still. The fire from the burning shack illuminated their silhouettes. They didn't enter the water. One of them stepped forward. It raised its hand. It waved at me. And then, across the roar of the river, I heard my own voice scream out one last time. "Subject has left the perimeter. Goodbye, Mark." I walked for 6 hours until I hit a logging road. A truck driver found me just as the sun came up. He asked me what happened. I told him I got lost and fell in the river. I didn't tell him about the shack. I didn't tell him about the radio. I looked up the area later. There are no records of a ranger station there. No records of a bunker. But on some old geological survey maps from 1954, that ridge is labeled Project Evergreen, Do Not Enter. I still take photos, but I don't go off trail anymore, and I don't carry a radio, because sometimes, late at night in my apartment, when the silence gets too heavy, I swear I can hear static coming from the walls, and a voice just beneath the noise, whispering coordinates.